the new pattern for this week. I'm making a dress for a wedding that I'm going to in just about 12 days. I've already altered the pattern pieces, as you can see up there, and I actually have a video on how to do this alteration that I've posted already. So if you want to see how to lengthen or shorten a bodice pattern piece, that's up. So now we're going to start cutting out the underlining. Because I'm doing view C, I actually have lace, underlining, and lining to cut out. So I'm cutting out in 3 parts. Sometimes I layer and cut. I could probably lay the lining piece under this and cut at the same time, but because I'm using such beautiful special fabric, I'm going to be super careful and cut each layer individually. So this is the beginning. I'm doing the bodice. Also, you'll notice I don't have it all laid out in one long piece because the fabric store messed up and they didn't cut the fabric right, so I had to go back and get it. So I have 2 pieces of fabric, one for the skirt and one that I'm getting the bodice and pocket out of. The outer layer of this dress is going to be cut out of this very sheer, pretty netting, and it has embroidery on it. And one of the reasons I really like this is because it had this neat border piece all along the selvage edge on both ends. So I'm going to use that. My hope is if I have enough fabric to lay it out this way, this will become the edge of the skirt and the edge of the sleeve. So I'm going to refold this. It was folded selvage edge to selvage edge, which was like this on the bolt, and I'm refolding it like this so that I can get my center front on the fold and get this along my hemline. So after I get it laid out, I will come back. Okay, so I just unpinned the underlining layer from my pattern piece for this first skirt piece, and I've got my lines. I'm trying to keep them as lined up as possible, and I'm going to find my center front, and I want to be really careful not to use too much of this fabric because there isn't that much. So it's hard to see, but this is the edge, so I actually can go that direction just a little bit. I'm going to slide it over, and I'm actually going to line up my hem right on that lace, like that, on the line, and I'm going to roll it forward so that I don't use too much. I have a whole lot left. It's hanging down on the bench down there, but there's lots laying down there, but there's a lot of pieces. Got a longish 3/4 sleeve and bodice pieces, so I want to just make sure I have plenty so I can play with placement. I actually bought extra fabric just for this purpose. So I'm going to line up my hem. This is my hemline. Pull this forward. So here's my hem. I'm going to line that right up on that line. Okay. And pin it down, and I want to make sure, see how it started, I don't know if you can see that in this screen. See, it's separated right here. So I'm going to pull that back up on top of itself, put a pin in it, pin that back into submission, and make sure there's no wrinkles between the 2 layers. And now I'm ready to pin this one down. I'm going to do the same thing for the other, and I'll show you when I get them both pinned down. Okay, so I've only pinned down just the skirt parts, and I'm going to just loosen this and show you up. Okay, so can you see all of that fabric that hangs down there? That's actually the selvage, and I have it on both ends, and I'm not going to cut right with the hemline on this like I did the underlining. So this is the outer piece. I have an underlining that's going to go with it. They're going to kind of be treated as one piece of fabric, but I'm going to want this layer longer, just a little bit. So I'm actually going to leave all of this on there for now, and I will cut it off however. I want to make sure that this stays longer than the under piece. So the under piece will get hemmed separately from this. So even though they'll be treated the same when I pleat them, they will be different when it comes to the hemming. All right, and that I'll show you some of that in the sewing. It's going to be it's a little more complicated way to put it together, but because I have sheer pieces and lots of extra things going on, that's the best way to treat these double layers. It'll also help hide my seams so you don't see the seaming through the sheer layer. So I'm going to cut these two pieces out, refold for my sleeve and my bodice pieces. So now that I have these both cut out, I'm going to go ahead and just put back with it for now the underlining piece so I can just keep track of all my pattern pieces. So I haven't cut the lining out yet, but it will be cut out of the same pattern piece for the skirt. So now I have my underlining and my outer piece, center front, and I'm going to do the same for the back. All right, so I'm pinned down. I'm just going to show you a few details. This is my sleeve, and I don't want it quite that long. Hemmed, that would almost be to my wrist, and I want more of a 3/4 sleeve. So I've moved the sleeve up, and you can kind of see the shadow through here. That's going to be my actual hemline right there. So I'm losing about that much sleeve. And come around this way a little bit. On the back, this is the actual grain line. So I'm using that neat design here for the back of my pattern. I don't know where I put my envelope, but I'll show you later. That's going to actually, the back has a V down to where the bodice with the underlining starts. So we'll have that neat little trim with a little bias binding next to it because the front neckline is going to need some bias binding. So here it is, ready to go. And I actually have leftover beautiful fabric that I'll probably just hem and make like a stole or a scarf or something out of, because it is really lovely, lovely netting. And I love the embroidery on it. It would also make a pretty pillow or something like that, but I think I'll just hem it up and wear it like a stole. Now that I have all of my layers cut out, I'm going to start piecing together my outer fabric, this pretty netting, with the underlining, which is this super soft crepey fabric. It's hard to see in the camera, but it's a super pale pink, and I almost did black underneath this, but I really like the blush under black, especially for springtime. So I'm going to piece together all of the pieces that are underlined. So the sleeve won't have underlining, and the upper part of the bodice will not have underlining, but the bustier style part of the bodice will, and the skirt. Just going to show you what it looks like when I'm choosing my thread colors. I bought black because I had black netting, but it really wasn't the best choice on the fabric. It's very noticeable, and I don't want to have a heavy dark stitch seam, so I went ahead and pulled out my flesh colors that I have, and this sort of ballet pink blends away the best. In person, on the camera it might show up a little bit. This one's second best. If I didn't have ballet pink, I would go with it, but this ballet pink in person is almost invisible. So I'm going to piece together the bodice and the main part of the bodice, and fit it, and get back with you in a minute. So I pinned together my princess seam line, and if you've ever done a princess seam line before, what happens is your side piece that adjoins your front piece are shaped differently. So I'm going to show you on this one. So here's my center front, and you can see it has some curve, but it's pretty straight. But my side, sorry, I should have laid this out first, has a lot of curves. This is my side front. Can you see it has a lot more shape? So when you go to put these together, there's some extra easing that has to go in. And so on this piece, it's already pinned. Down at the waistline, it's pretty fitted, so there's not a lot of easing to go on right here. And right here at the top of the bust, there's not a lot of easing. But right here in this little bit of curve, there's some easing that happens. The larger piece is the side front, the smaller, or side back, and the smaller piece will be the center front or center back. So for this one, this is my side front. When I go to sew it, I'm going to put the side front on the bottom. And what that does is it allows those great feed dogs down there to do the easing for me. So I'm going to lay this in for both. When I do the right and the left on this, I'm going to lay this in with this piece on the bottom. So I'm going to flip it over and stitch with the center front panel on top. Alright, so here I am at the bust line. I've already sewn down near the waist, so this is the shape. You can see how it lays, and you can actually see a little bit of the fullness, so that when I stitch, I have, this is my center front. You can actually see there's the center front. This is my center front panel on top. Just watching my 5/8. One of the hardest parts about this is that I have got 4 layers at that seam. It's not bulky, but there's a lot to keep track of. And I kind of let the fabric lay. You saw it kind of curved off to the left, and then as it comes under the machine, I'm going to get just a tiniest bit of a ripple. Let me get rid of the pin, and the ripple goes away. And I'm done. Okay, so now I'm going to pull it out and show you what it looks like. So I have my front bodice pieced together, and I want to show you something. Because this is an embroidered netting, can you see that little thread showing through? I'm going to go ahead before I get any farther and inspect for little pieces like that, because right now it's still open at the bottom. Let me turn it around here. I can still get in like this between the 2 layers and trim off that little thread. And I think I saw another one on one of the leaves, a little green thread. So I'm going to go ahead and inspect this real quick before I get it sewn up too far and get stuck with some little loose ends that I don't want to show in my final project. Okay, I finished the outer bodice, or most of the outer bodice, the part that's underlined, and now I'm going to do the corresponding lining for that, so that when I'm ready to add the sheer lace top part of the bodice, it can be sandwiched between the outer piece and the lining, and it'll have nice finished enclosed edges. I'm not going to have to do a lot of serging on this particular piece because it is fully lined. Most of the serging will be done only in the skirt and hem of the skirt part. So now I have my outer bodice completed and the lining for the bodice, and I have pressed it very carefully. This is synthetic, and because it's synthetic, it can melt pretty easily, and it shrinks. You can actually get like a permanent iron mark in it. So I set the iron to synthetic, less than wool. You want something less than wool, and always do a test piece on something like that. The same with this. I did a very gentle pressing. I didn't press very much at all on it, just to be careful. It's also hard to press because of this heavy embroidery. It doesn't want to press, or even stitching is a little different. You have very fine and then it gets really heavy all of a sudden, which is fine with the machine, but the iron's not loving it. But now I've switched to black thread, and I'm going to piece together the sheer parts that do not have any underlining under them. And I'm going to do a little, either a French seam or mock French seam at the shoulder seam and this tiny little side seam, and then I'm going to piece them together. So I'll show you that next. Okay, so I'm going to do a traditional French seam, and if you'll notice, it's a little hard to tell, but I have right sides out or wrong sides together, which is not how you normally sew a seam, but for the French seam it is. So we're going to make a tiny, we're going to use 5/8 inch total, but we're going to take 2 stitches, 2 seam lines. The first one's narrow, so I have my 1/4 inch foot, my straight inch foot, and I'm going to just do a 1/4 inch seam first. So we're going to do that. So there's my 1/4 inch seam on the right side. Okay, so now I've torn that off. I've pulled my stitches out. We're going to flip it over. Now I'm on the wrong side of the fabric, and we're going to take this, we're going to sew the seam again right next to the old one, this time 3/8 of an inch. So let me set that up real quick and I'll show you. All right, so I have it pinned together now. There's the pinning, and you can kind of see the shadow of the seam allowance in there, and I'm going to line it back up at the 3/8 inch line, so it's a little bit deeper seam than before. So what's going to happen is it's going to stitch right next to the seam allowance but not catch it. And so on the inside, this is my finished edge, and it'll look the same on the outside. So I'll have a nice finished pretty seam, and it'll look, since this is sheer and you can see through and see your seams on the inside, it's just more attractive. And I'm using, normally do this two-handed, but I'm trying hard to do it one-handed for you, just so you can see how this is going to look. I can see another little thread on my embroidery I need to pull out. So a 1/4 inch and a 3/8 inch add up to 5/8 inch. So I've taken my same 5/8 inch seam allowance, and this is the outside. That's, you can see the seam through to the inside, but see how pretty it looks? So when it shows through, because it's going to, it's sheer, it's much more attractive. So I'm going to do that. This is the shoulder, so I'm going to do that on both shoulders, and it has little teeny tiny side seams. Let me see if I can find, here you go. See how tiny that is? That's the little side seam. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and I'll show you when I'm done. All right, so I have sewn. I'm going to show you from the outside first. Here is the sheer part, the top of the bodice. Look at how cute that's going to be along the back, and you can see the seams through up. I haven't given this one a haircut yet. You can kind of see it. It'll be pressed to the back, so this is the front, so the seam will lay like that. So on the inside, this is what the seam looks like. If you want to know more about French seams, in my pillowcase tutorial, I explain, I give a really good up-close demonstration of doing a French seam on a cotton fabric, just a regular woven. So I think that would make it very easy to follow step by step to make a French seam if you'd like to. And this is the perfect project for a French seam. So now that I've done that, I've got all of my bodice pieces done. I'm going to now match my sheer piece to the piece with the underlining, and I'm going to start right at the center front, right here. And I'm going to do a couple pins in a couple places, right sides together. So here's my, make sure I've got this right. Yep, here's my side seam, and here's the side seam. And again, the seams, the side seam on this part is pressed open, but the side seam here, where I have a French seam, it can't be pressed open, so I'm pushing it to the back. Come along to this. All right, now this edge, this sheer edge of the netting, I'm actually going to put a black satin bias trim. So I'm just going to put a pin in just to hold it, and then I'll make it perfect. And I'll kind of show you how this is going to go together. Put a few more pins in. On the princess seam line, the seam is going to go towards the side seam, not towards the center front. And there's actually going to be a little clipping in here. You can see I've got some basting stitches, but I'm just going to flip this up so it's going to be like that. All right, so I'm going to finish pinning that together and I'll show you what it looks like. So I'm getting ready to sew this little front V. Let me show you on the lining. I think it's just easier to see. So can you see that V shape in the lining? And then on the sheer piece, it points down like that. And it can be kind of hard to get the point that goes up into the shape like this. So this is the best way I've found to do it. The first thing I did, I'm going to do this where you have a little bit better light. Can you see those stitching? This is on the 5/8 inch line, and it's a pretty small stitch. And I just need enough to be near the V. So there's the V. So I did that on my lining, and I did it on my outer piece, the piece with the netting. This inner stitch was just a temporary stitch to hold the two layers together right at the center front so they didn't shift on me. So that's what this shorter line is, and then this one is the 5/8 inch line. So then the scary part, this is what you do. We're going to release these so we have this tight little curve. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. I'm going to flip it over. That way my set up for somebody who's right-handed. So there's the V right there. And you can use, I'm going to just cut down. I may have to use some good scissors. Those are not going to cut. They're fine for thread, but not for this. All right, so we're going to just cut down like that. And what happens is I didn't cut all the way to the thread, but I cut close, and see, it releases it. So now when I go to put those two shapes together, they're going to fit together so much better. And I'm going to do the same thing on the netting. And make sure I don't have anything underneath that I don't want to cut on accident. So here's my netting. Do the same thing. Oh, I'm going to have to do this with two hands because that heavy stitching does not want to cut the way I'm holding it. So I will cut that and show you when I'm done. Okay, so I cut it real quick. So now I'm ready to pin the two pieces together. So I'm going to put my camera back on the tripod and I'll show you the pinning. So I've been vacillating about how I want to do the skirt. If I want to do it as three, the lining, the underlining, and the outer fabric as three independent pieces, or if I want to treat the underlining and the outer fabric as one piece. So what I've decided on is I'm going to hem. This is my underlining. I'm going to serge and hem it first, and then apply it to the outer fabric or the netting over there. So I'm going to kind of treat them as one, but I'm going to pre-hem it so that when they are caught in the side seam, the hem is already taken care of on this piece. The netting does not have to be hemmed. I'm just going to cut the netting close to this line, and I can have some hang below if I want to. So I've left all of the extra netting on there, so if I want to have a little extra beyond that line, I can. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to serge, and after I serge the front and the back, I'm going to turn it up and just machine stitch a straight stitch hem into this. This skirt piece, when cut out, is almost a rectangle. It's almost exactly the same top and bottom. It just has a slight curve at the waist and is very hard to see. So for my own sanity, I put a pin at the waistline so I can tell the waist from the hem when I'm working with it. So on to serging. This is how the serge looks, the stitch looks as it comes out of the machine. This is the top and the back, and then I'm going to press it with the iron up like this and top stitch it. So I'll show you that in just a minute. Here's my front skirt. I've pressed in the hem. This is the wrong side, or the back side of the hem. And I'm going to flip it over to stitch it, but this is how it looks. So now I can go to the machine. And one thing I really like about pressing in the hem is it just makes it easy. You hardly, especially with this fabric, it presses so nicely, and I don't have to even use a high heat. I can just line it up like this and stitch away. So this is how it looks stitched. And I'm going to do this to the front and the back. I normally would do an entire seam around and not do my side seams first, then hem, but because of how this skirt has to go together, I'm just not going to get to do it that way, and that's okay. This is the front skirt. I have pinned my underlining, that is hemmed, to my outer netting, and I've gone in and I've marked all of these sort of, they're almost a box pleat, all of the box pleats. So I'm going to kind of hold this up so you can see. That's the front of the skirt, and that's how the hem is going to look. We're pretty close to it. So now I'm going to run a basting line all along this waistline to hold all those box pleats in, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the back. This dress has pockets, which I just love, and you can always put a pocket in anything with a side seam, but this one actually came prepared with that, which is just really cool. So I am going to prepare my back and prepare my pockets, and then I will do side seams. So I'm going to go ahead and baste this together. And here's the basting at the waist. That's the back side, and that's the front side. So you can see it's little pleats in there, and I'm almost through with this part. I'm just loving, I wish the pink showed up a little bit better on the camera for the under piece, but I am just loving the blush under black. Very pretty. I've made an executive decision. The first one is I am not going to do the box type pleats in the back of the skirt. It's just going to be more flattering for my figure to have a gentle gather in the back of the skirt. And then I've decided to only put one pocket in. I'm going to put a pocket on the right side. So this is the right side back that I'm applying the pocket to, and then I'll apply the pocket to the right side front. So by not doing box pleats, I actually had them all pinned in, and I just didn't like it. I just held it up to my body, and it just did not hang as nicely as a soft gather will, because this is plus size sewing. I'm a bigger girl. I carry my weight mostly in my behind, and it's just more flattering for me. The other thing I did is I went in on the blush only, and I serged my side seams. Of course, the hem is already done, so that I can make some decisions when I get to sewing. I think I'm going to sew like the pocket area together, treat it as one, and then below the pocket I'm going to treat the fabrics as two if I can get it to lay pretty. So that's coming up next after I apply the pocket. Decisions have been made. So this is the back of my skirt, and I've got it left open for adding the zipper. So that's where the zipper is going to go. But I'm going ahead and sewing all 4 layers together. Made sure and lined up perfectly my stripe on my hem and my underlining hem, so that everything lines up perfectly. And I'm just going to sew just this far because I have it in the peach colored thread, and I'm going to backstitch, and then I'm going to switch to the black thread and sew the rest down with black thread. And I haven't figured out yet how much or if any of this I'm going to leave below this yet, so I'm going to actually, that'll be the very last thing I do when I try it on after pretty much everything else is put together. So I am going to go ahead and sew my seams together like this. So this is center back, and then I'm going to do the side seams. I have my pocket in. Let me show you the pocket, because here's the back side, here's the pocket. And from the front, so here's the front of the skirt, pretty pleats, and you can't even see it. The pocket just disappears, but there it is. There's the pocket. And I did stitch down a little ways into the seam line up here, and I've got it tacked just below, but I'm going to go ahead and sew the whole side seam up in a minute, and that's just going to help keep this closed so that this doesn't show through. And if I see that it pulls open a lot, I'm going to put a snap or a hook and eye or something to help hold it closed when I'm not using it, because I don't want peekaboo lining on my side seam. All right. This is my skirt lining, and I just sewed it together like a skirt, serged the inside. I rolled the hem up twice and just top stitched it. I wanted to make sure that the hem of my lining is shorter than the hem of my dress. So this length is going to be shorter than this length for this one at the side. So when it goes inside, I do not want my slip showing. I don't want that to show, so I made sure it was a little bit shorter. And I'm going to double check it before I get it all stitched. If I have to, I can roll up the hem one more time. So now I'm actually going to just set the two together. And because it's a lining, there's two ways I can do it. This is the inside of my dress before the lining. Get it flipped around. There we go. So I can put the lining in so that when it's on the inside, the raw edge is against my body, or I can put it in so that the raw edge is against this raw edge, and I have this nice smooth part against my body, which is my preference. I just like that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to flip this around so that I have wrong side out on the lining, and here's my center back. Now I'm not going to sew this, I'm going to baste this in, but I'm not going to sew right at the center back, because what I want to do is put the zipper in first in just the dress part, and then this part I'm going to turn back and hand stitch in later. So I'm going to sew most of this lining down, but I'm going to leave a little bit open right at the center back, and I'm going to start pinning it. Now my skirt, I have got basting at the waistline for doing gathers in the back, and I did the same thing in the lining. So I'm just going to line up side seams. So here's the side seam of my outer skirt. Here's the side seam of my lining. And the lining has the seams sewn together so they're pushed to the back, but the skirt has the seam pressed open. And I will tell you, I sometimes, because I have multicolored pins, I sometimes color code. So like when I was making these pleats, all the pleat beginning and ends were blue pins, so I knew to match blue to blue, just to make it easier for me. So I kind of like to do that. All right, so I'm going to pin this all the way around. Now I have not put my pleats in my lining at all, and what I'm going to do is just fudge it from the inside. I'm not too worried about it being exactly perfect, but I can get really close with the pleats that are already in this outer part of the skirt. So I'm going to just match it up in the lining. You always want your lining in your skirts or pants to be shorter than the outer garment, but a little bit bigger around. You don't want your lining to be tighter than the outer skirt or pants, because it actually pulls on the outer garment and it will not look right on the body. It will look like something's wrong and you can't figure out why it pulls that way, and it's because the lining was made a little bit too small. Lining is soft and loose and flowy, and it will just crumple up on the inside and not leave any lines if it's just a little tiny bit bigger. You don't want it huge, but you do want it a little bit bigger. All right, so got a couple more pins. So when you look at this dress from the outside, it's going to be like that, and from the inside, it's going to be nice and pretty and smooth like that, and it'll feel nice against the body. One of the best things about having lined garments is how nice this feels against the body. I love that. Okay, so now I'm going to come to the front, find my center front of my lining, doing this the fudging way. Oops, I gotta pull out a pin to do it. There we go. Center front of the lining. You don't want your lining to be twisted on the inside, so I'm going to make sure my side seams match up with side seams, and center front and center backs all line up. And then I'm just going to ease in the fullness so that it doesn't become bulky. I don't want this excess all bunched up in one spot. It can make the skirt puff out in the front, so I'm going to evenly tuck this excess fullness. Whoops, I have the lining pulled. There we go. So I'm just, you can see here's a pleat right there. And I'm going to just evenly pleat. I'm going to kind of go the opposite direction just to make the, so the seam doesn't get too heavy right there at the waistline, like that. And pin it in, and I'm going to just ease all of that fullness in so that it hangs nice and pretty and I don't get any extra on the outside of the garment. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so I've taken about 3 minutes here to pin in my lining, but now I have the lining pleated to the inside. And that's how it looks, and then I held it up to make sure that it doesn't show at the bottom, and it doesn't, so we're good to go. So I'm going to now match this waistline up to the waistline of the bodice, not catching the lining of the bodice at all. I'm going to have the lining completely free. I'm going to use the lining to hide all of the waistline seam when we're done. So I just want to, for now, find my center back. And I haven't pulled my strings for gathering in the back yet either, so I've got to do that. I'm just going to start lining this up and match up side seams, and that'll let me know how much to gather in the back, because I decided not to do the pleats back there. So here's the back of the bodice, and this is what I need to gather up to fit the back of the bodice. Side seam with pocket. I love a pocket. All right, I'll show you when I'm through. And there is the back of the skirt attached to the bodice, and I always come in and check. When you have so many layers like this, it's easy to get a fold over or something. So I always just double check my seams, and I check. This was the side that I had up when I was stitching, but I always want to look at the back too, make sure that I didn't have, got a little dip right there where it gets a little wide, so I'm going to check that and make sure it doesn't affect it from the outside, but everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and do the back of the other side and then the front. All right, I'm getting ready to sew my skirt to my bodice. I do not have the skirt lining included in this. I will do it after this is attached. I should have early on put my bias around my neckline. Here's the neckline, and it's just going to be trimmed in a black satin bias. I bought black satin, it's over there, to make the bias. There's my bias piece. I got home and it's not enough. I don't want to piece my bias. I want a solid piece. So I'm going to go buy another piece of satin. So I'm doing everything I can that does not require the neckline to be involved. So I can put the sleeve in, I can attach the skirt. I can't do the zipper yet because I have to have the bias part first. So I'm going to get these, at least the sleeve and the waistline part done. I can even get the lining for the waistline or the skirt lining in partially. I don't want it right at the zipper, but I can get it mostly in also. And then I will make my trip to buy more satin. We don't have I used to have a fabric store less than 5 minutes away. Now the closest one's more like 15 minutes away. The JoAnn's is over 30 minutes away. I just live in a new area where there's less fabric store options and it takes longer to get there. So fabric store's got to wait when I've got to go do all my other errands so I can keep on sewing. I'm going to get this put together here at the waistline, and I'm going to sew it. Let me flip this around. I'm going to sew it skirt side up because I want to be able to see my gathers. And normally I do 2 basting lines so that I can have a nice even gather, and it just makes it lay flat and it's easier to sew it in. I didn't this time, which was, you know, just sort of shame on me, skipping, cutting corners a little bit, but I also have very little time to get this dress made, so I pretty much have to have it finished this weekend. Today is a Friday. I have to wear it next weekend, but we have a lot of travel time between now and when I have to wear it. So I'm really running short on time, and I knew it when I started it. So sewing time is not taking that long. It's the little things like not having the right satin to do the neckline that's going to hold me up. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this in, and then I'll probably put the sleeve in, and then I'll have to go run to the store. I tried the dress on to check for fit, and an issue that I have, and this is for two things, is partly because of how I carry my weight, which is mostly in my behind, and also because I have a bad back and I tend to lean forward a little bit when I walk. My hemline was angled like this, so the back was shorter than the front, which is just an awful look. You don't ever want to go around with an uneven hem. Your hem should be nice and parallel to the floor. So there's an easy fix for that. This is the front of my skirt. Here's the front of my bodice. And what I needed to do was I added length in the bodice because I am long-waisted, but I did not need as much in the front as I did in the back because of my two issues, my bigger behind and my bad posture from multiple back surgeries. So after trying it on, I saw that I needed to lose about an inch in the center front. It was fine at the side seams, it was fine in the back. So what I did is I ripped out just the front of the skirt, and I moved the skirt at the center front up the amount that I needed, and then I let the fabric kind of fall naturally to give an even nice curve, and I pinned it in and I restitched it. So now I have this excess that I need to cut off, and then I'm going to, because it's bulky, there's a lot of layers. See all these layers in here? I'm actually going to go to the serger and I'm going to serge this edge together. And what that'll do is it'll compress this. I'm not going to serge it off. I'm going to leave the length in there, but I'm going to compress it and serge just along this edge. It compresses it, it makes it nice and tight. It's going to not make it pull from the inside, and it's just a nice way to handle it. So while I'm at the serger, it will go ahead and serge off this excess too. I could cut it off first. It's just a personal preference, but that's my next step. I'm going to serge this inside part before lining goes in. All right, this is the inside of the bodice where the little deep V is, where the netting, sheer netting attaches to the rest of the bodice. And I had clipped the center front to release it so that I could get it sewn together. But when I tried it on, and you can actually kind of see, there were some striation lines showing up in the fabric, and that's because the rest, it needed a few more release lines. So I went in and I trimmed. I just cut through, but not all the way to the stitching. There's my stitching line. So I went ahead and did a couple of those through, and now I'm going to flip it around and show you. Pardon I'm holding this with one hand and trying to flip with the other. So there's the front of the bodice. Here's the sheer netting, and this is where it was pulling just a tiny bit. It was really subtle, and I might have been able just to iron it out, but why leave striation lines? And I sure didn't want, the thing with striation lines is it shows where something doesn't fit right, or where there's tightness or a pull or something, and it kind of points usually to a problem area. And this would be right in the center between my bust line, in the middle of my bust line, and oh boy, I sure don't want arrows in the fabric pointing to that. So I released it, and now it lays nicely. Here's my waist after serging. It doesn't look any different from the outside, but it's reduced some of the bulk, and you can't see the serging or anything through the fabric. So I think next for me is probably going to be sleeve, because I still don't have my black satin to trim out this neckline. I am going to lunch with my husband and my son, so we may make a quick run by a fabric store for me if we get an opportunity, so I can do this part next in the zipper and do sleeve last. We'll see. Lunch for sure, next. Made it to the store after lunch, and when I got in there, I went to Hobby Lobby because it's just the closest one. I knew they carried satin, but when I got in there, it's a super shiny satin, and it's just not the look I want. I want something softer, and I don't know, just I didn't want satin. I had charmeuse with the piece that I already had, which is a little less shiny. It's sort of brushed, but I didn't have enough of it. So I chose this Georgette. It almost looks like chiffon, but if you look, you can actually see it. It has a crepe yarn, which makes it a Georgette, and it's super soft and shapes beautifully. And when you have a couple layers worth, it's not, you don't really see through it. So that's what I'm going to use to shape for my neckline. I'm very happy about it. So I've got my bias cut out for that, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this next so that I can get the zipper in and finish up my lining and my sleeve. So I have my bias piece folded in half and pinned down, so the raw edge was with raw edge and the folded edge is here. That's what it looks like in the back, and it's going to, this part's going to wrap around, and I'll show you later. You can machine stitch the final stitch or hand stitch it. I probably will hand stitch it just because I like not seeing top stitching on nicer garments like this. It depends on what I'm making, but for this, because it's a little bit more formal type outfit, I probably will not do the top stitching method. I probably will do the hand whip stitch from behind. But here's the bias going on. After I get a little bit stitched, I'll show you what it's going to look like when it's turned to cover the raw edge. I have got my bias folded over back here and pinned, so I'm going to move up here where it's not pinned yet. And this is what I'm doing. I'm just folding it over the seam allowance like that and pinning it down. And then I'm going to come back and whip stitch along there. And I'm actually, I'm going to get close so you can really see this. See, can you see those stitches right there? I'm actually, when I go to whip stitch it, when this is pulled over, I'm going to go into those little stitches so nothing will show on the right side. So this is the right side and this is the wrong side. So there it's pulled up a little bit right here so you can see those stitches. I'm going to pull this down and whip stitch right into those, just picking up those stitches, the black stitch there, and not getting anything in through the tool, and it hides it really nicely. So this is my neckline. Finally able to do it, and I'm really pleased with the Georgette. I just like the look of the Georgette more than the satin for this, and that's how it's going to look on the body. Alrighty. This is the reverse side of the bias, and you can see my hand whip stitching. The nice thing about using the old stitching line, the machine stitching line, is that I can count like every 2 to 3 stitches, and it gives me a very even hand stitch, which is almost invisible. Like, it's very hard to see. And this is the wrong side, so when I flip it to the right side, you can't see anything at all. Alright, it's time consuming, but I enjoy it. I just turn on something fun to listen to and stitch away. So I have the neckline completely stitched now, and it's ready for me to sew up the last little bit so I can put in the zipper. And I'm going to go ahead and move, since I am threaded up with black right now instead of the peach, I'm going to go ahead and work on my sleeve for a minute and get it partially put together. So I've marked my front notch and my shoulder notch, or my shoulder seam notch, and then I've done an easing stitch because this has a little bit of fullness, and you can see it's so lightweight it started to ease on its own. It isn't a gathered sleeve, it is a set-in sleeve, but it does have some fullness, and this will just pull it out. So I've done that to both sleeves, and now I'm going to go ahead and sew the underarm seam and set it in. I have my sleeve pinned in. So I just want to show you. It's a little hard to see in this netting what you're looking at, but here's the underarm seam. This is the lining. That's the sleeve down in there. You can see my basting stitch to help ease it in. And now I'm going to pull my tray table off and sew it in. And I like to sew with the sleeve side down because there is extra fullness and allow the feed dogs to ease in that little bit of extra. It usually works great and you don't get any little pin tucks or anything on the underneath side. So, all right, so the tray table is off and I have my sleeve on the free arm. And I am sewing at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to, whoop, got pins here I need to get rid of. And I always like to start at the underarm seam because everything fits perfectly there and it's a good start and stop spot, and I don't have to worry about my back stitching and so forth. I can just cross my seam when I come back around. All right, it just took a couple minutes and the sleeve is in. Super pretty, and I love having that detail for my hem. All right, second sleeve. I'm doing an invisible zipper now. I love invisible zippers. This one is pink. I couldn't decide if I wanted pink or black, but the black shadowed through a little bit, so we're going with pink. And let me show you over here. Here's my foot. Let me take that out real quick. Okay, so this is the invisible zipper foot for my machine. You can get them, they all will have little teeth like this in the front. And it's a channel underneath that allows the zipper to just ride in it. And the invisible zipper actually has, it folds over. The teeth fold back a little bit. So I can open this up. See, there's the little channel the teeth are in. So when you go to sew this, whoop, you could set this in here. The teeth set right in, but I actually, pardon my hand in this, I'm going to have to, there we go. I fold out the teeth so the teeth fit right in the channel, like that. And depending on if you're doing the right or the left, you use the right or the left of the zipper foot. So then all you have to do is move your needle position over, and here's my needle centered. Whoops, there, now my needle centered. And then I can just move it. There, okay, we're centered. Then I can just move it over however much I need so that when the needle goes down, it misses the teeth, but I want it pretty close to those teeth. You want it as close to the teeth as you can get without catching the zipper, and that just makes it more invisible so that when you zip it up, it just looks like a seam and you can't tell there's a zipper there. So I'm going to go ahead and set up this first side here. You can start with your right or your left. I'm starting with the right because I think it's more difficult, but it's a little it makes it a little easier if it's not attached to the other side. So I actually do the more difficult side first, which for me is this side. I always start at the top and sew to the bottom. And because I'm sewing with a waistline seam, I'm going to be very careful to pin that seam when I go to do side number 2, so that I don't have, so that my seams line up perfectly. And while I'm talking about seams lining up perfectly, another thing you need to pay attention to, let me get this up where you can see it. Here's a seam. So this is my princess seam line. And if you do it right, your princess seam line matches up perfectly with your pleat. And here's my side seam at the waist. So here's my bodice side seam, my waistline seam, and my skirt seam, and see how they line up perfectly? That's exactly what I want my zipper to look like in the center back too. You don't want that wonky. So you just need to pay attention, pin carefully, that's what we do. We pin it into submission so that when we get to the machine, it obeys. So we really, that's the sign of a quality made garment, is when all of your seam lines match up perfectly like that. All right, I'm going to set up my zipper and I'll show you. Okay, so this is how it looks set up. I have not put my needle position back yet. I'm going to move my needle position over, and I'm going to just eyeball a little bit and make sure I'm where I want to be, and I am. Okay, so pull out my pin. I sunk my needle so it doesn't move on me when I move my pin. And we're just going to take a few stitches. Now you can put as many pins as you want into your zipper too. I seldom do in the zipper. I just think they're pretty easy. And I just want to make sure that it's feeding. And it is. Alright, so here's my waistline seam down here. Got the threads in it. Alright, so this is it. This is all you have to do for an invisible zipper. Crazy easy, right? Now when I get to the waistline, I do want to make sure that that seam allowance is flipped up into the bodice and not down into the skirt. That's important that the seam allowances go the right direction. It's going to make the skirt poof out. It makes the bodice hang wrong all the way around. You don't want those seams pushed down. So make sure they're up into the bodice. And then when I attach my bodice lining, it will completely hide all of those raw edges too. So I'm going to keep on stitching. I'll show you when I'm through. Okay, I'm getting close to the bottom of my zipper. Let me just move back so you can see. This is why I say this side is harder, because normally you have all of your excess fabric off to the left of the machine. But when you're doing the right side of the zipper, if you're doing it top down every time like I do instead of the bottom up, you're going to have all of your garment shoved into the throat of your machine. Now I have a nice wide throat plate, which makes a difference, but that's why I think this is a little bit harder. I wanted to talk to you about the bottom of the zipper though. Down here at the bottom, this is where my seam is attached, and this is my zipper. So I'm actually going to line my zipper up right with that seam, and I'm going to stop and back stitch right before that. I want to make sure there's enough room that I can get my zipper to tuck behind. So if I get too close, or if I go over, my zipper will not tuck behind right, and it'll make a little pooch at the bottom of the zipper. We don't need a pooch at the bottom of our zipper right on our booty. So just make sure you stop. It can be like one stitch above, just so it's close but not beyond that seam at the bottom. Okay, my zipper's stitched, and I just zipped it up to see, and right here I don't think I got close enough. And the nice thing with these zippers is it's really easy to put it right back in and stitch a little bit closer. I'm going to wait until I sew the other side to make sure, but I think I'm going to have to go back right here, and most of it's fine. Most of it just disappears. It goes right up to the zipper teeth, but not over it. See how that's really close right there? You can't see. I have to pull it away for you to see it. But right here, and I think it's mainly because of this embroidery, it's pulling it back, but I'm going to try and, we'll see. I'm going to set up the other side and see if I need to go back and fix that one little spot. Okay, I'm going to set up my second side of the zipper, and I'm leaving it zipped shut for now because I want to make sure I get this seam perfect. So I actually line my seam up with my seam like that and fold it on top of each other. The main thing I want to do is make sure that those seam lines line up just like that, and then right sides together, and then I'm going to pin it, and it's sliding, so I keep rechecking myself. Doing the same thing at the top, making sure my two the seams at the top match up and putting a little pin in it. The bottom I'm not as worried about. There we go. Okay, so once I get it pinned, I check it from the outside. And look, can you see the difference? Look how low that one is and how high that one is. So my pinned one is not right on that side. Now let's check this one. Those are lined up. I'll make it come over far enough when I'm stitching. So I need to raise this up so those line up at the top. gonna stitch this one in. I just pinned it backwards. Get it lined up and pin it backwards. There we go. All right, going to the machine. All right, so the zipper's in. This is how it looks. And of course, all this is going to get taken care of in the lining, and I'm going to have a little hook and eye at the top. So that's all that's going to be seen. And you can see it looks really good, it lays fine. But there are some places where I didn't get quite close enough, and it's this spot right here where I showed before. So I am going to come back and stitch this just a tiny bit closer. That's right in the center back at the waist. That's pretty noticeable, but the rest just disappears, which is why I love an invisible zipper. All right, I'm going to fix that spot, and then it's lining. My zipper is all the way in, everything's good, and now I'm just going to sew the little tail of the zipper down to the seam allowance. It doesn't have to be sewn to both sides, just to one side. This just keeps your zipper from flipping, and it will make it lay flat. It does a lot of things when you're wearing it. It keeps your zipper from bulging. So I'm just going to do a couple little stitches. And that's it. It's tacked down to just the seam allowance, not to the outer fabric, and it'll keep it from flipping up when I go to use it. All right, I have the skirt lining all pinned in. I have gathers in the back, pleats in the front, and I'm just going to go through and stitch it 5/8 so that it's right on top of the seam line from the inside. So I'm going to sew those together real quick, and I am so close to being done now. Here's a little lining trick. I have my lining in at the waist. This is the zipper. I flipped it around through the hem, and I've pinned it together so that when I stitch, I'm going to stitch way out away from the zipper out here, but it encloses everything nicely. It's not going to be edge to edge, but it's going to be pretty close. It limits the amount of hand stitching you have to do. And we'll get as close as we can. See, here's my, you can see the parts there. I always sink my needle before I pull my pins out, especially when I'm doing it one-handed with the camera. All right, almost to the top. I'm not going to get perfect up here. I'm going to get close. I can feel my zipper rolling. It works best if you use a regular zipper foot, but I don't have one yet for this machine, so I'll pull it out and show you what it looks like. Okay, so all this part of the zipper I won't have to hand stitch. I've got a little bit up here where I will. I'm going to do the same thing with the bodice zipper, but with it, here's my, I'm going to fold up my seam allowance to match perfectly so that when I'm ready to stitch this down, it'll look right. So I'm going to prepare the one atop now, and I'll show you that one. Here's a little lining trick. This is my bodice lining. I flipped it around to the right side, so I have right side to right side along the zipper, folded up my seam allowance, put on my traditional zipper foot. I'm not getting too close to the zipper teeth. Kind of being careful about that. I want room in there so that the lining doesn't get caught in the zipper. My back stitch. But we're just going to stitch this in, and it does, the teeth make it want to kind of push away, so we're going to watch it. Those heavy parts of the embroidery sometimes also push it away a little bit at the foot, but and I'll do any finishing by hand, just a little bit up in the corner. Let me flip it around and show you, whoops, what it looks like. So now, this is the inside of my zipper. Isn't that pretty? And I've done the same thing down in the skirt portion, most of it. I didn't get all the way to the top yet, but I'm going to finish that. And then I will just have to finish along the waistline my lining, and all those raw edges will be completely enclosed. And from the outside, you see nothing. It just looks perfect. I've got to fix this down here. This little part up here isn't caught, so I'm going to fold that in and tack it down so it doesn't show. Doing the same thing. This is the skirt portion of the zipper. Last part, and then I'm going to go back and do the other bodice part, and I will be almost down to just handwork. I am also going to do the flip and finish sort of at the center front of the lining, so I will have less handwork to do, but I am in the final phases. Okay, so this is a wadded up ball, but I'm going to try and show you. I have pinned at the waistline. I've actually folded in the dress. It's a little hard to see, and pinned my lining along the waistline, right sides together, or actually right side of lining to the skirt. So it's the waistline. So it's lining to lining, right sides together. And I'm not going to be able to do the whole lining this way. There's just no way. But I'm going to do as much as I can by machine. It makes it nice and smooth, and then I'll go back and finish by hand. And like I said, it's kind of a wadded up ball. As I go, I can pull out pins and it'll unfold itself a little bit, which will make it a bit better. The lighting's terrible. There we go. So here it is pinned. Look at the mess it looks like. But this is where I stop pinning. This is where it pulls back around. So here you can see the waist of the lining into the skirt, and this is the bodice lining. But it is getting sewn to all layers. Okay, so I've sewn that little bit. It's not the whole thing, but I'm going to now unfold it all, flip it around. So this is what the lining looks like now. Here's the side seam. So I didn't quite make it to that side seam. It goes all the way around. So see how that's finished in the inside? Pretty nice. I am going to have to do some handwork, but not nearly as much. I don't mind handwork at all, but it does speed it up. So I am almost completely done. I have one little thing down here that needs stitched with some black thread. So I'm going to I did the sides. I forgot the center back. So I'm going to put my black thread on, sew that up, and then I'm going to trim off this excess netting and start the handwork. I am completely done except for this last little bit of hand stitching in the lining. This is the bodice and this is the skirt, and I machine stitched parts of it. This is machine stitched, this is, and most of this is, I came and did a little bit of handwork right in this little tiny section, and then I have to finish this waist. I've already done this side by hand. So this is hand stitched here. Alright, so this has been hand stitched, and I'm just going to show you how I do it. So I'm going to come over to this section that needs done, and I've got a knot in my thread, and I'm going to come in. I just don't want the knot to show, so I'm coming in from this direction and out to hide my knot. So now the knot's going to be up underneath, and then I need my glasses. All right. I take my thread and I go through the stitch at the seam, and then I come up and I catch my lining. And I do this all the way down. And catching that thread in the seam actually, whoops, makes it stronger. Lining's delicate and it can shred pretty easily or rip. So if I'm catching more than just the fabric, but catching that actual stitch, it's actually a little bit stronger. So I'm just going to do this all the way down. This is an old basting thread, so there's lots of little threads that I'm going to pull out. When I'm done, I always go back and trim everything up, give it a haircut, check for little threads that I don't want anymore that were temporary stitches. And here I have to make sure I catch the actual stitch and not the basting stitch, because I have both of them right there beside each other. Anyway, that's how it looks, and I'm just going to keep going down till I get to the end. Basting thread. So here's the finished dress. You can see the sleeve. This is the back of the dress. So this is how the back neckline finished off. You can see the lining on the inside and the bias around, they went all the way around the neck. The invisible zipper, and I did pleats along the back, and then you can see here's the hemline, and can you see how that went in there? Actually sewn together. This is the underlining and the netting, and then here's the lining. It's loose in there, and then this is the part, this is the inside of the skirt. So back of skirt, front of skirt, that's what would be against the body. All right, and then I'm going to flip it around and show you the front. All right, so here's our front neckline, and I'm just going to put my hand up in here so you can see this is the area where it's sheer and there's a seam. So this is actually what it would look like with the body on the inside. So you can see there's your seam line, and I've serged it. And up here, pardon my hand in this, this is the French seam at the shoulder. So that actually shows even less than that. Arm's eye does. So there's the front. And then the front of the skirt has the pleats instead of the gathers. Just back up a little bit. And that's the finished dress. I'm going to lighten the, there we go, now back up. That's the finished dress.